Well, welcome. I'm Dr. Jen, and this
I'm
is
Dr. Yvonne.
Eat Your Damn Food. And I will tell you, I am really excited. We've been talking for weeks about, drumroll please, is talking about our book with that same title called Eat Your Damn Food. So I think the place that I want to start, so this has certainly been a labor of love in terms of this book. And Dr. Yvonne, like, when did we start really talking about, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to write the book? Do you not even know how long? Has it been 2 years or has it been longer?
I want to say it's been a little bit over a year. We were doing a retreat for Fab, which we're there together, and we were asked to write something that we like a future goal, something that we really had in our heart that we wanted to work on in the next year, and both of us had it on the list. And so from there, we just started talking about it, and it's like, why don't we do this together? Which thrills me because first, and this might sound cheesy, but you're one of my favorite people on the whole planet. And
Oh,
so, and
God. Okay, now
and
she's
it's
going
not
to make
just
me
as
cry.
not just as a person, but also like we're on the same page. Like it's philosophically when it comes to the way we approach clients. I mean, we literally can finish each other's sentences. We say that all the time. And so there's this congruency that our clients get from both of us. And that's really rare. You know, when two people can really kind of really understand something and come across on such this like in such a similar way. So
Yeah.
I feel like the book might even read where people, unless we're telling them who's writing, they might not even know who's writing because it just kind of it flows so easily between us.
Oh,
So the fact that we're doing this together, I would not want to do this with anybody else.
thank you so much, Dr. Vaughn. Something I say is rub it in. When people give you those compliments, sometimes it's so easy to go, oh, but like to take that in. So thank you so much for your words. And I think what I want to, somebody asked me this, and I sort of just assumed like the people closest to me knew what I was writing about, like what this book is about. And if you just had to put it in a nutshell, like what is this book, Eat Your Damn Food? We'll go into the title in a second, but like, what is this book about?
So it's not like a one thing. It is about healing when it comes to food and body issues.
Mhm.
It's really this combination of our life's work. Both of us have been, 20 more than 25 years in this, just shooting people with eating disorders. And we've talked to so many people. We've seen so many people move on to live, fulfilling lives out of an eating disorder that coming together, the two of us of all of our experience and putting down information about how people have gotten better, some stories that will resonate with people who are struggling with food and body issues. That's I don't know if I have like it's a story from here to then. We even throw in our own stories. I mean, there's so much to this book, but it's really just our life's passion work of what we've done. We've
Yeah.
putting it in one place.
You said it beautifully. Okay. And Dr. Vaughn, this is just what hits me right now is like, we do put some of our story, and I know you could say a lot on this topic, but I'm wondering if you could just share something about your own story and just short, because we know like you could say a lot about this, and we're going to keep talking. So this is going to be the first of many conversations we're going to have. But because I think your story really gives people hope of living this joyful, fulfilling life. Like that is possible when you get help with your eating disorder.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to write a whole book about my experience with all of this because it started so early on with
Mm.
messages about food and and food being deprived and having my mom who was also like entrenched in diet culture that we didn't call it that at that time, obviously so long ago. I'm 58 years old, and so I can remember being 6 years old and really absorbing that food was bad. And then in other situations, just personal situations where I lived with my dad and my stepmom who also like deprived me of food. So like there was a lot of food messages from, I feel, since as long as I can remember. And then, growing up, kind of thinking that way, and then getting messages that really affected my self-esteem and really made me question what I was doing. I just kind of like, I got hacked. I literally gave up my internal control of loving food, because I've always loved food and I still love food, and loving to eat, and like that little kid energy of all of that. And over time, it just got ticked away to where I handed it over to whatever, like what we would call now the latest influencer was. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. And then you're off to the races, basically. And it's one thing after another, one rule after another. And before you know it, the box that you're living in is very, very small. And
Mm,
that's kind of how I felt. And we always say that there's like a mirror between the food, in the sense of like the people will start eliminating foods and restricting, and the box of food that becomes acceptable or like is safe becomes very tiny. And that sometimes with some people, not always, also is congruent with our bodies in not a very good way, but it also mirrors your life. And if I
mm,
think of my life back then, it was not fulfilling. I wasn't myself. I was not becoming who I could be, especially at a very young age. And so it
mm,
took a lot of time to reconnect with who I'm really was meant to be, basically.
mm.
So I can go on forever. So like you.
Oh, Dr. Vaughn, thank you for even sharing that. And I could say so many different things. And I think what I'm pulling out, though, of what everything you said is that of your journey and what's possible, right? What's possible. Like if somebody's listening today to this message, like it's possible no matter how long you've been struggling. And I think what's also important is you don't have to be struggling alone, right? No matter how long it's been, or maybe you've had, somebody I know we work with is like, oh my gosh, why am I here again? Like, why am I in this hole again? But like, it's possible to get out of that. But the thing I want to pull out that you said is like, how I'm eating is how I'm living, right? Because these eating disorders are not just about the food, but they are about the food, but they're not just about the food, right? So, how we're eating is how we're living. And so it is so interesting that there are these sort of two parts. That's why on our team we have therapists and we have nutritionists. Having that hand in hand is so important. So I guess that would be the other thing. It's like, why are we calling it eat your damn food? And we say it kind of tongue in cheek, but we also mean it, right?
Yeah, it's funny because like we said it at first and we were like, oh no, we can't call it that, right? But then it really makes a lot of sense, because what we're trying to say here is that food is meant to be eaten, right?
Mm,
Food is not supposed to be micromanaged, not supposed to be overanalyzed. We're not supposed to be afraid of food.
mm,
It's an enjoyment, and it's a fuel, it's a nourishment, and that's what we want to get back to,
mm,
because that's when a baby is born and babies are fed. That's all they're like, they like what they like, they don't like what they don't like, they want what they want, and they'll eat what they need, and then they stop, so it's getting ourselves back to how we're supposed to be, that relationship we're supposed to have with food.
mm,
And that's the message that we want to give there, for
mm.
sure.
And one thing I love with you, Dr. Vaughn, so many things, but one thing I do really love is how you bring science to the food, right? Like, because there's also so many of these trends. Like we talked about the diet culture, we're kind of calling it the diet matrix. Like we want people to move out of this diet matrix and to unplug from this matrix. But it's hard when it's all around us, right? It's like we're so inundated with all these messages and now we have more and more messages. And but I'm wondering if you were going to give somebody even like one tip today. Like I'm thinking one that seems to come up a lot when I'm eating with friends. Like I'm sitting there eating with friends and I'm like, they're not eating any of the bread, they're not ordering any carbs. Like it's just like, like that's not so fun eating with you when like you could see sometimes people are so overly conscious. And I'm not saying some people don't have certain gluten things or dietary things. So this may not be a blanket statement, but in general, like why are carbohydrates so helpful for us to have the balance of our meals and our different food groups?
And so each food group gives us different nutrients, and those nutrients have been scientifically proven that the
Mm.
human body needs. And so science is not changing. The trends change. So if you've been along as long as we have, like we've seen carbohydrates being the enemies in the 70s, right? When we had bodybuilders and they would really only eat protein and things like that, and they would drink eggs, and that's what you would hear back in the 70s. And then it
Mm.
flipped over in the 80s, and people were just like, now it was fats were the enemies, so people
Oh
started
God.
eating a lot of carbohydrates, and they removed the fats and a lot of the proteins because they
Huh?
considered them to be high in fat as well. And then it flipped over again. So Atkins, which is that doctor that had this very low carb diet, he was really popular in the 70s. He kind of fell asleep for a decade and then came back, made a
Oh my
comeback.
gosh.
And again, not really based on sound science advice for any of it, really. Very, very, very few books out there when it comes to diet, and all these different diets that we hear of are not really based on just basic information. We know the human body needs carbohydrates, it needs proteins, it needs fats, it needs a balance of nutrients. And the other thing that gets left out with a lot of like this trying to science approach this is the enjoyment of it. Like we want
Yeah.
to have like a meal and be like, that was so yummy, or have a dessert that we truly enjoy. And that's the mental health piece. So it rolls over and we become mentally unhealthy when the little kid inside of us can never have the things that he or she really wants.
Yeah. I like something that's coming to mind that Hannah, another nutritionist on our team, says is like, there's a reason God gave us taste buds. And
Absolutely.
she'll sort of say it like that, but there is something to that. Like there is a reason that we really want to enjoy this food.
Yeah, even something like taste buds, I think is interesting because the taste buds are like we have a bunch of different ones. And so there's like the sweet one, the salty one, the savory one. So we have the different ones and they all want to be used. So let's say you eat a meal and all of a sudden you want a dessert. A lot of people will be self-critical about themselves, like, oh, I crave sugar or I have a weakness for they use these words when it's just
Right.
a basic physiological
Mm.
need. The body is going to ask you for what it didn't get.
Mhm.
And so it's not something that's going to be harmful. But I feel like we live in a society where we feel like we're one bite away from disaster because of
Yeah.
the messages that we're
Right.
getting.
Gosh, you brought back like a not so great memory, and I hadn't thought about this for a while when I was growing up in the 80s and the big non-fat thing. And
Mhm.
it was like, oh, everything was like fat-free this and fat-free that. And I remember I didn't have like, when you get acne going through puberty, I kind of skipped that. But when I started really doing that non-fat thing, my skin was a mess. And it wasn't even like typical acne. It was like these bumps underneath my skin. I remember I was like, what is that? And I also noticed some other family members who were doing that kind of craziness, although this is what we were given. And it was
Yeah,
like, oh, this makes so much sense, right?
right.
They were also experiencing all their skin problems. So,
I can tell you why.
yeah, that's what I was like. I know she's going to be able to tell me the science of it. So go for it.
Right. So fats help us to absorb fat soluble, but they provide and we absorb fat soluble vitamins, and many of them involve the skin. Vitamin A, D, E, and K are all part of it. And it's going if you're not absorbing the vitamins that you need, we're gonna see it on something in the body. So there's always going to be a ramification to the body when something it's deprived of. And again, we don't have to be perfect either. You can, it doesn't mean that every day has to have like all the perfect nutrients and vitamins, and if not, something bad's gonna happen. It's when we go out and we restrict something on purpose over and over again, eventually the body's gonna show signs that it's not happy. That's basically what happens.
Yeah. So we're not going to run out of things to say. That's what I got. So we're going to be doing different segments. But I think the last thing that maybe we can go into a little bit is there really is this idea of like the mood food connection that we see with our clients, but ourselves as well, right? It's like usually when somebody is struggling in whatever way they may be struggling, whether it's under eating or overeating or a version of any of that, they're not usually like, wow, I am so happy. Everything is going so great. And I'm dealing with these food struggles, right? It's like something starts going on in the person's life that is having them turn to these things and then turn to it as like kind of a coping skill. No, nobody sees it that way in the beginning, right? Like people aren't getting like, "Oh, I'm actually turning to this disordered eating, this eating disorder in a way that I'm trying to cope with something on a deeper level." So, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Dr. Vaughn.
Yes, so there's physiological reasons and then there's mental health reasons for what you're describing. So on more of the physiological reason, I'll let you fill in the mental health reason. I will say that when the body starts getting deprived from food, what it does is exactly the same as if it would have any other injury or if it was put under some other severe stress. So again, the body is meant to be fed. It's really expecting a rhythm. We wake up in the morning, we're eating within a certain time, and then within a certain time, we'll have a meal or a snack, and then it goes on from there throughout the day. It's almost like a car that we're just refilling. We're putting in the gas when the gas needs it. Very simple. That is what the body is expecting. Because of so many different deprivation ways that people like they start taking either, you know, don't eat many meals in the day or they skip meals or they start taking out the nutrients, the body is then forced to go inside for energy. And what ends up happening is that it sees it again as something that it's been hurt, right? So any stressor in the body creates certain chemicals. And basically it's our body's way of trying to get away from the stress. So if you and I are here having this wonderful conversation, and let's say at my house, all of a sudden the door opens and somebody comes in and tries to attack me, I'm going to like have a rush of energy. I'm going to probably push that person, run out of the way, and run, and get out of the way. And my heart's going to race. I may freeze. There's so many different things that can happen. Well, that's the same exact chemical that comes up when we don't eat regularly. So like if you don't eat regularly, it's called cortisol, it's like the scientific name to it. But basically, cortisol gets us out of danger when we are under stress. And cortisol goes through our system and your body takes starvation that way. It creates a very efficient response to starvation. So that's why we see people basically start ignoring their hunger, fighting through hunger as if it's a good thing. And then all of a sudden they're like, I'm not hungry anymore. And that's because cortisol has taken over. A person stopped eating breakfast. And so now the body just automatically in the morning, will spit out that cortisol. So a couple of things will happen. So cortisol masks hunger. If I'm running away from someone who's trying to attack me, I'm not going to stop mid-run and be like, excuse me, I need to eat lunch. Like, I'm just
Mhm.
going to keep running. And
Right.
so we kind of, the way you start that day, if like you already skipped that meal or whatever, you started off that day running and you're not going to stop.
Mhm.
Most likely, your body's not going to stop the signal because now you have that in your system that says something's wrong and I need to be on edge in a sense, right? And so this combines then with anxiety, which what you were talking about is like, if I'm already an anxious person to begin with, and now I have cortisol that's coming out for other reasons, I have it because I'm stressed and maybe a lot of things worry me or bother me, but now my non-eating has created more in that bucket of cortisol. So this is where then it starts becoming, for some people, panic attacks. It
Mhm.
starts really debilitating their ability to live, a life or even be social. And then they start hiding behind the food, which is one of my favorite terms, which is they start then avoiding eating with other people because it feels very uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
so and it just kind of it's a cycle. And again, there's a lot more science to that, but that's kind of
Mhm.
like my quick and dirty type of
Yeah.
explanation to why the mood then starts getting worse when the food is missing.
Right. Right. So, Dr. Vaughn, this might be a good place to pause, but I think for anybody who is listening, I'm wondering like, can you see yourself in anything you heard today, right? And the other thing is I think something I've seen you do really well, I think we do really well in Fab is if you've heard something today and it feels like, oh my gosh, that's so much. Oh my gosh, the science. It's like, just start somewhere with one little step of something that you may be able to do a little bit differently to take care of yourself. Something, right? Because I love hearing the science because it makes so much sense. But somebody might be like, oh my gosh, and the science and this and that. It's like, well, we want to take the science and then to be able to use it, right, in our meals and with our life. So that would just be my counsel for anybody listening today. And
Yeah,
Dr. Vaughn, this has been a pleasure, and I look forward to many more of these as we go continue on our journey.
same here. So happy to be here.